The Boston Marathon is an event touted as one of the most difficult marathon courses due to its 26-mile hilly terrain. So would you believe me if I told you someone actually ran the Boston Marathon 4 times in a row? Would you find it even harder to believe that just 10 years prior, that same person struggled with alcohol addiction and weighed in at over 350 pounds? Joining me today is David Clark, author of the book Out There, A Story of Ultra Recovery. Thanks for joining us today, David.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for an ultra runner, a 104-mile event is not unheard of. But for someone who, at the start of his recovery, could only run 15 seconds, it's pretty inspirational. I want to come back to the Quad Boston, but for people who haven't had a chance to read your book yet, tell me about your life before running.
Sure. Well, I certainly didn't have the conventional introduction to running, and certainly not ultra running. In fact, I never ran at all as a kid or, early in life. In fact, I've now said all of the things that people say to me about running, like, I would only run if someone was chasing me with a knife, or I don't even like to drive that far. But I weighed 320 pounds and I needed to do something, drastic, something really big to change my life. And, through a long chain of events, I had found, I'd found myself in this dark place. I had a host of medical conditions and financial problems and everything else, and I needed, emotional stakes to be high and some mechanism to pull myself out. And running seemed as stupid as anything I could think of. So, I decided if I could become a runner, then maybe I could escape substance abuse and obesity and all the other things that were chasing me.
When people talk about addiction, they often talk about a rock bottom moment. What was that moment for you?
The rock bottom moment is really more internal than it is external. I think a lot of times people think it's, you wake up in jail or you had this really bad circumstance, and certainly I had a lot of that stuff happen to me, but it's really what it means that's more important than what's actually going on. And I woke up one morning and it was the exact same experience I'd had, for years and years before it, but somehow it was different. And I felt like there was a moment that I had to take advantage of, and if I didn't use that particular morning, then maybe I was going to die, or another moment wouldn't come. So I just kind of jumped out before I could convince myself to change. And if I hadn't changed that moment, I think I could still be out there using right now.
Now, you had done a few marathons and a half triathlon when you were first introduced to the world of ultra running, seemingly by an article you read in the Denver Post about a man named Dean Karnazes. So what was it about ultra running that drew you to the sport?
I've always been told I was crazy, my whole life. I've always just kind of been that extreme person, And so when I found running, and I started out being able to run, 15 seconds at a time. And I'd run and walk and somehow parlayed that into a 10K and a half marathon and a marathon, like you said. So I thought I was crazy. I thought that was kind of a long journey that I'd been on. And all of a sudden, my world was rocked when I read that this guy had run 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. And I just absolutely didn't believe it. I mean, it was just impossible to me in every way. So I researched a little bit and read about Dean Karnazes and found out about 50-mile races and 100-mile races, and I just had to touch that. I just had to touch that and see what it felt like, and so that kind of woke something up in me.
So not only were you crazy enough to set your sights on ultra running, but several injuries threatened to keep you from being able to run, period, which might have thrown a lot of people back into addiction. How were you able to sort of battle through these different obstacles?
Yeah, my injury, looking back now, was potentially the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because it forced me to kind of look at what my life would look like without running in it. And at that point, about 2 years into my journey, running was an integral part of my sobriety, and it was kind of hard to see where one ended and one started. So it kind of forced them to split. And I realized that I had to be okay with my sobriety first, even if I never ran again. So it was hugely important from the spiritual side of me. And addressing that, it also kind of freed me up, though, to let it go, right? And say, well, if it doesn't come back, I'll be okay. But having accepted that, I'm not just going to roll over and die. I'm going to fight for this running because it is important to me. So that's when I decided to become a good runner, and before then it was just very recreational, just to lose weight, just to feel better, mid back of the pack, and that was fine. And I decided, maybe I should take this a little more seriously and see how far I can take it. And
work on the form and stuff for the running.
Yeah, treat it, like anyone would treat anything. Like you can play golf for fun, or you can really see, how low you can lower your handicap. And I kind of looked at running the same way. Like, let's see where it'll go.
And to your credit, you didn't just have like a stubbed toe. You had 2 herniated discs in your back, and you continued to run and run ultra after that.
Yeah, I never really let someone telling me what I can't do get in my way, And it was a physical therapist, not my physical therapist, but another one that actually told me that I should give up running entirely. That really lit the fire underneath me, and I didn't like that at all.
So coming back to the Quad Boston, it was a very symbolic event for you, and every full marathon that you ran represented something different. So why did you choose this particular marathon, and what was the significance of each completion of the course?
It happened very organically. I am always looking for kind of crazy things to do, but I wasn't particularly looking for the Quad Boston. It kind of found me. I went out to Boston, and I was speaking to a parent support group for addicts and families that are touched by addiction. And I met a lady, her name's Deb Kelly, and her daughter had just passed away at 16 years old of heroin addiction, overdose. And I'd always wanted to run the Boston Marathon, and I found out she was running it in memory of her daughter. So we just kind of started a conversation. It was like, well, there's such another part of addiction that people don't talk about. We think about the addict, and it seems like kind of a selfish, thing to do. The addict thinks I'm only hurting myself. But obviously that's just not true at all. And families are affected, and other people are affected. So I wanted to do something that would kind of full circle bring all that awareness together, not just for the addict, but for the families and the survivors and everything. So somehow I landed on the idea of running it 4 times and running each one of the marathons for some segment affected by addiction. The people who are still out there struggling, who haven't found sobriety yet. People like myself who are lucky enough to have made it out. The people who have died and the people who are left behind. So each one of those marathons represented one of those 4 groups.
So when I tell people about, I'm interviewing this guy, he ran the Boston Marathon 4 different times, people always ask me about the logistics of it.
Sure.
Sort of like, well, did he run to the finish and then take a car back? So, how did that work?
Yeah, so we started at the finish line in Boston, and the Boston Marathon is a point-to-point course, which made it kind of, better for us logistically. Typically, they bus everybody out to the starting line in Hopkinton, and then you just run back to Boston. So I started at the finish line on Sunday night, and the marathon starts Monday morning. And I ran out to the starting line, and then I ran back to the finish, and I ran back to the starting line and did the final Boston Marathon with the official group on Monday morning, and with Deb Kelly in honor of her daughter.
Were you were one of the last official starters, right?
I was. We had it timed perfect. And as I was coming back in on the 3rd marathon towards the finish, my wave went off at, I think it was 11 a.m. or somewhere right around there. And I had it timed. I was going to get there just on time to go off with the wave. And about a half mile before the finish, there's like a little bottleneck, and the police held me up. So I had to wait for the entire wave to come through before I ran the last half mile up into Hopkinton. So I was in a scramble to run that last half mile after everyone had passed, and they were pulling up the timing mats as we got there. So we were able to hit the timing mat and then start as the last official starter.
Did you sort of want to tell people, I just ran it 3 times, I'm not like just here late?
At that point, 70 plus miles into it, you just grunt
care.
when people ask you a question.
Yeah. So now in your book, you talk a lot about recovery runs, but not in the traditional sense. You use running to help raise awareness and help those that are in recovery. So tell me about some of the different recovery runs that you've done in the past, and also about the Superman Project.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind is the 300-mile recovery run that I did in Colorado. And, I don't always use my running, to celebrate recovery or to be an example of it. I think it's an important part of it, but it's also, for my own selfish reasons sometimes too, and for my own peace of mind and for my own physical fitness and my own health. But I always say it's a fine line to balance, right? I mean, there's that there's that one side that, through doing some big runs like the Quad Boston, I can get some attention on addiction and recovery. But also there's that other side. It's like, no one wants to hear about your, stupid run through the park, at 5 o'clock at night either. You can definitely overload people with it. So we've tried to focus it around a few really big events where we could draw other people in. And the 300-mile recovery run was that. And I ran from the Wyoming border to the New Mexico border, across north to south, across Colorado. And I blogged a lot about it, and we separated the run over 10 days. So it was an ultra marathon each day for 10 days, 31 miles. And I did one of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous each day during the run, and blogged about it and invited people to come out and run with me. And it turned out to be an amazing response, and it was an incredible journey of my own internally, running the miles and doing this kind of spiritual work while I ran, but also in seeing people come out and share their stories too, and how running has helped them deal with addiction. And the project that I started is called the supermanproject.org, and we coach newly sober athletes and people who are trying to find sobriety through sports. It's not for everyone, but if someone is looking for something a little outside the box for recovery, we're there.
So when people talk about addiction, it's often classified as a disease of excess. Now, what's your response to critics that say that you traded one addiction for another?
I do get that a lot, obviously. And, I really don't engage in a lot of debate about it. It's one of the things about writing a book. You learn to let it go, right? And, when I wrote my book and released it, I figured it belongs to the world now. And if anyone wants to spend the money to read it, they're entitled to their opinion. But I do think that, running can be an addiction, and almost anything can be an addiction. But I go to great length to make sure that my running resembles my recovery and not my addiction. And that's an important step. Addiction has that compulsive component, that destructive part of it, that you're engaging in it over and over again despite all these negative consequences. And I see people that their running resembles that, so I make sure that mine does not. But it is a work in progress. Sometimes you feel that tug, that back and forth, because I can be really compulsive. I can be really dedicated or obsessed, or whatever word people want to use to describe it. So it's just like anything else. Balance takes work. So I constantly do that. I'm also a vegan, so I hear, where do you get your protein a lot? So I get, did you switch addictions, and where do you get your protein? I'm always answering those two questions.
That was my next question. Where do you get your protein from?
The same place gorillas do, plants.
Beans?
Yeah. Fruits, vegetables, plants, beans, all that.
So also in your book, you describe the practice of logging all of your workouts, something that you've done from day one, and in fact you recommend to anyone that's looking to lose weight. I would love to hear how different these logs are from day one to now training for ultra events.
Yeah, they definitely have a very different, flavor to them now. My first log workouts were literally, went to the treadmill, set it on 4 miles per hour, ran for 15 seconds, walked for a minute, ran for 15 seconds, walked for a minute. And those were my workouts. 20 minutes, I would do that back and forth. Eventually, the 15 seconds became 30 seconds, and then 1 minute of running, 1 minute of walking. And I slowly worked up to the point where I could run 20 minutes at a time. And then it's just a natural progression from there. And that's the beauty about running, is it's so analogous to addiction and recovery. You do small work every day, and it eventually leads you to amazing places. And if I wouldn't have logged my workouts so meticulously when I first started, I would never believe how little I was doing and how much result I was getting from that. Especially nowadays, when I got to New York, and the first thing I did was checked into my hotel and ran 20 miles around the city. It's interesting to see that what was impossible one day, yesterday is routine today. And but that's life. That's the journey.
So you've run across the state of Colorado. You've done how many ultra events? You ran the Boston Marathon 4 times. What's next for David Clark?
It's a good question. I'm still inventing that as we go. But I do want to continue to explore the boundaries. Running to me is just a vehicle, for self-discovery, even to the point where I don't even view it as the nuts and bolts of running anymore. what I'm searching for is something beyond miles or speeds or paces. It's a deeper journey into myself and what am I capable of handling. The reason you put yourself in these extreme circumstances is to see how you respond. And that's an amazing thing for an addict. I couldn't trust myself to do anything before. I couldn't follow through on anything. I couldn't get anything done. So I've come to trust myself greatly. And so running for me now is just about continuing to pursue that and see to what end it can take me. And so far it's taken me so much farther than I ever thought I could go.